Welcome back to Historical Projects, community podcast exploring project success and leadership. I'm Eric, and today we're stepping inside one of the most extraordinary buildings ever created, Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. Few structures have carried as much meaning, ambition, and cultural identity across time. It's been a cathedral, a mosque, a museum, and once again a mosque. And through every transformation, it has remained a masterpiece of engineering and imagination. Today, we're exploring Hagia Sophia not just as a monument, but as a project, one that shaped empires, survived crises, and continues to inspire millions. To help us unpack this remarkable story, I'm joined by David Jenkins, who has had over 40 years of industry experience working globally with leading companies. He holds a degree in mechanical engineering, a postgraduate diploma in commerce, and began his career as a fitter and turner. Over the years, he has authored several books on project success, documenting his journey and that of others who've discovered that success is driven not just by technical expertise, but also by the ability to engage and connect with people. He brings a deep passion for history and a wonderful ability to connect the past to the challenges we face in modern leadership and project work. I'm thrilled to have him here. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Eric.
David, when you first learned about Hagia Sophia, what captured your imagination or surprised you?
For me, it's its size. When you stand from the outside of the building, it's a brutish building. It's very chunky and solid. Also, it's 82 meters long, 73 meters wide, and the dome that sits at the top is 33 meters across. And that dome is actually sitting 55 meters into the sky. It's just an enormous building when you think it's over 1,500 years old.
Wow, that's amazing. Let's start right at the beginning, though. Let's take us back to Constantinople, as Istanbul was called, in the year 532. What was happening in the city, and how did Hagia Sophia emerge from that moment?
Well, what I'd like to do is to explore Hagia Sophia, which is called the Divine Wisdom in Greek, in Istanbul. And I want to talk about its origin in the Byzantine Empire. Then we're going to look at the Ottoman Empire, and then we're going to look at the Turkish Republic and this modern debate around, is it a mosque or is it a museum? Our story starts in 532 AD in the heart of Constantinople. That's what it was called back then. It's now called Istanbul. Emperor Justinian I, driven to leave a legacy rivaling Solomon's temple, commissioned Hagia Sophia to be the greatest church after the riots destroyed its predecessor. Now, he did not choose traditional architects, which is really cool, but he chose a mathematician and a physicist. Now, they had a challenge, and that challenge was to build a massive dome atop a square base, something never been done before. And their solution was revolutionary. They created 4 massive piers at the corners, arches between them, supporting a vast dome of over 30 meters in diameter. 40 windows at its base created this heavenly glow. And amazingly, Hagia Sophia was completed in just over 5 years and 10 months. That's ridiculous. 5 years and 10 months. It took 14 years to build the Sydney Opera House, and Eric has already taken us through Cologne Cathedral, which took 600 years, and Derek's going to take us through La Familia Sagrada in Barcelona, which took 120 years. So this is just remarkable what they did. It can house between 10,000 and 15,000 people. It has survived multiple earthquakes, and for nearly 1,000 years, it stood as the world's largest cathedral until Seville Cathedral was built.
So, David, what's your personal connection to this building? Is it curiosity, admiration, or something else?
Well, I actually have visited twice. The first was in 1990 alone. I was on a 9-month backpacking trip around the world that took me through India, into Nepal, and all through Eastern Europe, and I made my way down there. And that's when I first saw it. And I saw it from the outside, which was fantastic, this big building. And then in 1994, I then did another big backpacking trip with my wife, Leisha, at the time. And this time it was really good because I actually paid the fee to go and look inside the building rather than being a cheap backpacker in 1990. And when you go into this building, it is absolutely amazing. You walk in and the light floods through all the windows and fills this big building with light. And of course, you get to see the mosaics from the ancient times when it was Constantinople and a church. But then you also see the iconography of Islam as well in this modern world. Of course, when I was there, it was a museum.
I was going to ask you that, whether it was a museum, a church, or a mosque. And was that in both visits, David?
Yes, in both visits, it was a museum.
I remember going there in 96 and they were still restoring the mosaics then. So it had lots of transformations over the time as Ottoman and then Turkish Republic. Can you talk us through those?
Yes. In 1453, Sultan Mehmet II conquered the city and Hagia Sophia became a mosque. And of course, minarets rose, the Christian mosaics were concealed, and Islamic elements were added to the building as well. But the building wasn't erased, it was simply adapted, reflecting the fusion of cultures. And of course, its dome then inspired generations of Ottoman architects. Now, if we fast forward another 400 years, in 1935, under Ataturk, Hagia Sophia became a museum, a symbol of Turkey's secular modernity. Now, Ataturk's an amazing individual. He came to fame fighting at Gallipoli and became a war hero who became Turkey's first president. Now, when it became a museum, visitors could marvel at the Christian mosaics and the Islamic calligraphy side by side in this rare place. It was just brilliant. Yet in 2020, it was renovated into a mosque, sparking global debate over its heritage and identity. Hagia Sophia remains a place of wonder, emotion, and enduring symbolism.
So, David, if you had to describe Hagia Sophia in one word, what would it be and why?
Amazing. And the reason why is because it's one of the largest buildings in the world, even today. And it was built in 5 years and 10 months over 1,500 years ago with whatever technology they had. It's just an incredible architectural achievement.
And it's still standing despite all of these things happening in the world.
That's right.
Have you got any other info about the building, David?
Well, some of the things I find fascinating is the acoustics. Now, the building has this natural reverberation of nearly 10 seconds, so that's not an echo. What it means is if you were to sing, your voice would travel for 10 seconds before it hits the wall, which means in the mass and the times when that occurred, it must have been an incredible sound. Now, you can go on the internet, and actually what's happened is researchers have been able to recreate what that sound is like, and it's just amazing.
I'll have to try that, David.
It also has a weeping column, and there's one column inside that's said to have miraculous healing powers. And I know when I was there, I found it, and visitors place your thumb in this small hole and rotate it for good luck. All
Special.
old buildings have graffiti, and there's an amazing Viking graffiti of a guy called Halvardin, who in the 9th century put his name there. And even now we are able to see what that looks like.
We should get Banksy to do a bit of artwork and see if anyone can find it.
That would be fascinating, wouldn't it? And of course, there's a dome of light. Now, the dome is remarkable. And what happens is because the way the windows are and the light floods in it, it's almost like when you look up, the dome is floating. It's just a wonderful experience to be able to see.
Well, thanks for that. That paints such a vivid picture of the building's journey. But now that we've explored the story of Hagia Sophia, I'd love to open this up and connect it to the world of modern projects and leadership. I believe there are so many lessons hidden in this building. Have you ever visited a place that made you feel the way people describe feeling inside Hagia Sophia, small, inspired, or connected to do something bigger?
Yeah, definitely. There was on that same trip when Lisa and I in 1994, we then actually travelled around through Turkey into Syria, Jordan, Israel, and finally into Egypt. And in Syria, there's the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus. Now, this was built in the early 700s, and it's an amazing building that I still remember the serenity. The building itself is really large. They have a large rectangular courtyard, which has fountains in it. And then, of course, then you move into the central prayer hall with these big carpets across this massive floor. And it was such a great feeling that I had. And I still remember that moment.
And David, does that building still exist?
Yes, it still does. I'm not sure if it was damaged through the wars, the civil war in Syria, but I think it still exists. And if you ever get to Damascus, I really encourage you to go and look at this the Umayyad Mosque.
It seems fascinating. But going back to projects, though, can you recall a project in your own life that felt impossible at the start, the way Hagia Sophia must have felt in the 530s?
Personally, a project was really writing a book. I've now written 5 books, and each time I start that journey, it seems impossible to be able to do it. And what I found interesting is the best way to write a book, and I wonder if, I suppose Justinian I did that, is you tell people that you're going to do something. And it's amazing when you tell people you're doing something, you feel accountable to do that. And I know through all of my books, at times I've wavered and thinking, can I achieve this? Because all my books have been driven through interviews, over 180 people. And it's only by interviewing people, it gave me the strength to be accountable to them to finish the book. So for me, I'd encourage people that want to go down that path. It may seem impossible, but it's actually easier than you think.
Well, that links into my next question, and that might be a similar answer. What's a moment when you worked on something that outlived your expectations or took on a life of its own?
Definitely, if we go back to the books, that they've left a legacy and outlived my expectations. Because I interviewed 180 people, I was fortunate enough to create connections with some wonderful people. And some of those people that I still have conversations with today, 15 years after the original book that I wrote. And I'm still amazed that they talk to me about the books and they have it on their bookshelf and they still reference it. So as I reflect, there's a real legacy that I've left with that work that I did over my career.
So going back to your books, so all of those people that you interviewed, I mean, they've also left a legacy, really, haven't they, in your books and in those interviews? And are all those people still around, or have any of them passed on that you know of?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot still around because of the age of when I wrote those books. But some of my best mentors or my mentors have passed on, and I'm so grateful. And I've often reflected that I wonder if they knew that in helping me, the interview is just part of it, but giving me guidance in how I ran projects is so valuable. And at the moment, my focus is at helping university students, undergraduate and postgraduate, and mentoring them to give them the knowledge that was passed on to me, because they also feel the pressures of delivering projects, the stress, imposter syndrome, all of those things that they're struggling with. And it was only through my mentors that I was able to develop strategies to manage all those fears and deliver projects successfully most of the
So,
time.
so those people who you interviewed or those people who were your mentors have indirectly influenced the people that you're mentoring.
Without a doubt. And I know when I talk to students about it, a lot of the stories that I'm sharing aren't mine. They're just a collection of stories of all the people that I've spoken to over my career as well.
That's fantastic. Going back to Hagia Sophia, so David, have you ever been part of a team that had to rebuild or reinvent something after a setback, similar to the dome collapse in 558?
Oh, definitely. But before I go there, I just want to give a little bit of insight into the dome. So the dome originally was a very flat dome when it was built. And of course, when the earthquake occurred, that dome collapsed structurally. It wasn't sound. And that's why when you look at the current dome, it's more of a hemisphere, and that's why it's lasted for 1,500 years. But if I think of a project myself, when I went through those emotions, it was a project that involved developing operational procedures in a rail terminal, and we had to develop about 2,000 procedures as part of handing this over in operational readiness. And we were a team of probably about 8 people, and we were working really hard to develop this work. And we were on target, we were on schedule, and everything was going well. We'd put out the procedures to be checked. And then people were saying they're good, but of course, when it came to commissioning, the operators really didn't like the procedures, and it It was a really difficult period for me as the leader of this project because if the operators didn't like it, they wouldn't use it. And of course, as a team, we all had to look at each other. I had to then go to my sponsor and say, look, we're going to have to rework this. And we then had to work out who was going to pay for this additional work. I then had to go to the operators and appease them and try and understand what they were doing. And then, of course, I had to work with my team because they felt really flat and were annoyed that they did all that work and people were unhappy. It was a real challenge for me, and I reflect on that a number of times. And I think I learned as part of that is I joke with people, have you ever written a procedure or a document or created a project plan that no one actually read? Because often we do that. And in this case, we thought people were reading these procedures. But in hindsight, I don't think they were. We didn't get lots of red pen. So I think that's what I learned from that exercise, Eric, is if there's no red pen on your work, do not assume that people are actually engaged in your work.
Is one of the major learnings in that, David, though, that if you don't involve the people who are going to use that work, then there won't be ownership of that, and they'll never agree to it.
Without a doubt. I don't know how you feel, Eric, with your career and all the work you've done, is that often some of the best ideas, the best things that we do, they're sound, they're the good thing to do. However, if you do not engage with the people who will use them, it just will not get picked up.
One of the learnings I had in one of the most recent companies I worked for, one of their values or their visions, I can't remember what you would call it, was that 99% of what we need to know is known by the employees. So if you don't engage with those and get the right people in the room, that's when things fall over. So I think that was a good learning for you.
And to be honest, it's shaped my books. And that I still remember that was a turning point when that occurred back in year 2000, around then, that it made me realize that I had to be better to deliver project success. I realized it's all about people. Projects don't fail technically. And often as technical people, we go, yes, yes, yes. And however, if we keep asking the question, why did it fail technically? Why? We end up getting to a point where people didn't communicate with each other. And it wasn't the
100%.
technical thing that occurred. It was the fact that people weren't communicating.
I like to call them human moments, David. We need to communicate with people. Going back to Hagia Sophia, so Justinian built Hagia Sophia to restore confidence after that crisis. Have you ever led or witnessed a project that served a similar purpose by rebuilding trust or identity?
Oh, yes, yes. I've done a lot of work in studies in the mining industry. And when you do a study in mining, often to develop a mine, it can take 15 years. And each study begins with a concept study, maybe a year, and then you do a pre-feas, and then you do feasibility. And what I've learned is at each gate of these studies, they get submitted, and often they would fail to progress to the next phase. And that's typically because of the market conditions, because the concept that you're trying to work on is based on market conditions about how profitable we'll be. So often these studies get parked. And I've worked on studies that began 15 years ago and then get dusted off. And then people start to work through that study. And often what happens is when people start, they often judge the people that did the study 15 years ago, that maybe they didn't do a good study and that's why it never worked. Well, it was purely economics. It just wasn't going to work. And that's why. And what I've learned, and others have taught me, is that when you go into these situations when you're trying to kick off a study, it's critical that you try to rebadge it, to get energy, to help people understand why it's important. Honour all of the great work from the previous studies, but then inspire the new generation who are picking up on this study to take it forward and hopefully get it off the ground.
Can be very frustrating. You mentioned before Hagia Sophia changed roles many times. How do you personally navigate moments when your own role or identity shift?
Oh, that's a really good one. I think I've had 15 roles over my career, and I recently was taught a wonderful concept called the sigmoid curve, and I just want to talk a little bit about it. Often in our roles, we see life and business and society as a linear progression, how successful I am in my career is like a linear thing. It just grows and I get more successful. But I now know the opposite is true. I believe our progress and our growth in our roles is far more cyclic, of ups and downs. My career has never been a linear progression at all. It never has.
That's pretty amazing, and I think we've all been in that boat of moving into different roles and going out on different tangents. So I think that's quite fascinating and quite exciting.
What I find interesting is that the sigmoid curve, and I get you to Google it, it's a wonderful thing, and it describes that cyclic curve as having three phases. It's literally there's a learning phase. And when the learning phase, we go down, we go backwards. And then there's an opportunity or the growth phase where we continue to grow. And then there's a decline phase that we all go through. And I think for the learning phase, it's important that people understand when they take on a new role, they're going to be stressed. Their progression will actually go backwards because you're meeting new people, you're learning new procedures, you're just trying to understand that role. So be patient with yourself as you struggle. And I think as managers, we need to know that new people joining our projects for a month, they'll be going backwards as they struggle to orientate themselves. And the more that we support them through that learning phase, the quicker they can then move into a phase of growth and opportunity. And that's where they build confidence. They start to work, they're contributing, they're collaborating, and as individuals, they are starting to progress through their role. However, what happens is we eventually get to the phase which is called the decline phase. So if you can imagine, you've started off learning, your progress is going backwards, then you start to grow, and then you get to the top of that curve, and then you start to decline. And the decline phase always happens. I've been through it a number of times through my career, where you start to lose focus and purpose in what you're doing. So the question is, if that's happened to me 15 times through my career, how do you avoid the decline, that difficult period? Well, the sigmoid curve says you take a leap, a sigmoid leap. So just imagine as you come into the top of the growth curve, what you do is you start another sigmoid curve, a sigmoid leap. Because when you're at the top of that curve, you're feeling confident. Everybody thinks you're doing a good job. You've actually now been targeted for these new roles because people want you. So that's the time when you're confident to enter another learning phase, because in the learning phase, you will start to decline. Again, you'll start to feel uncomfortable. You'll have to meet new people. You'll take on a new role. And it's much better to do that when you're feeling good about yourself than trying to take on those new roles when you're deep in the decline phase, which I've been in my career. And this decline phase can take a couple of years, depending on what you're trying to move through. The key thing I've learned when we move from roles, from one role to another, is to be patient. Don't expect everything to happen straight away. Be prepared for that uncomfortable uncertainty. And then as you start to get into the growth, really enjoy it. And when you get to the top of that curve, be aware that if you need to change your game, because if you don't, you will then slide into the decline phase. It's a wonderful concept that I love to share with people about their growth in their careers.
It sounds, David, that the sigmoid curve isn't just about careers, but it's about life.
Without a doubt. And I've looked at the sigmoid curve and you can see it in companies. Companies can have great years. Projects can have great years, but at the end, there will always be a decline because that's the cycle of life. In trees, in everything that we do, we get growth. We have things start off in the learning phase, we get growth, and then we decline. It's just part of the way the cycle of life is. And I wish I'd learned that early on in my career, because I only learned that about 8 years ago, and it explained why my career, there were times when it was quite difficult and I was quite depressed trying to work out my purpose. And once I understood that model, it validated my emotions that, it can be challenging. And even at my age now, in my early 60s, I'm finding I'm transitioning to another sigmoid leap and another curve, and hence this podcast that we're working on together, Eric. That's giving me a chance to reinvent and learn new things.
And I'm enjoying it too as part of my transition to retirement, David. Back to our projects and leadership. So, David, if you could stand inside Hagia Sophia at any moment in history, which moment would you choose?
Oh, that's a really good question. For me, I would choose when II had just conquered Constantinople. So Constantinople is an amazing city, and it's only been conquered twice. In the Fourth Crusade, and they came from the sea, and however, Mehmet II actually came from the land and took it. And when he came in, he walked into the city, and the first building he went to was he walked to Hagia Sophia and walked inside of that building. The building is so iconic to the history of Constantinople and also Istanbul for so long. And what's fascinating, the actual building, and when it was first built, Eric, it was actually covered in white marble. But of course, that doesn't exist anymore, of course. And the fact that when Mehmet walked into that building and he understood the significance of this building, and what he wanted to do was to continue this legacy of this amazing building. He chose not to do any to destroy it. He did very little changes to it, really. Then made this building continue for another 400 years before it changed again into a museum. I'd love to have been there and watched him.
Was Hagia Sophia the building that had the most minarets? Because when it was built, that showed the symbol of power.
I don't know that story. I know, I think it has 4 minarets, and right next to it is the Blue Mosque, which is a beautiful building, and that actually has 6.
I think it must be the Blue Mosque I was thinking of.
The Blue Mosque, yeah, it's beautiful. The tiles all through there are just fantastic.
But that's for another podcast, David.
I think so.
So which figure from Hagia Sophia's story, if we go back to the building we're talking about, which figure from its story, Justinian, Anthemius, Mehmet II, or Ataturk, the father of Turkey, which one would you want to most interview and why?
I would like to interview Ataturk. And the reason I'd like to do that is because it's probably it is closer to my life. And I know when I've been in Turkey on both those times, he's a remarkable individual. And I don't know what it was like when you were there, Eric. Every shop you go in, there's a picture of Ataturk on the wall. At every
Yes.
shop, every building, every house. So he's highly admired. And I know when I was with a shopkeeper once, he said that we worship three things in Turkey, and one is, of course, Allah, Muhammad, and of course Ataturk. And he said to me, it's not necessarily in that order. So they really think he's an amazing individual. And of course, when that happened in the 1930s and Turkey had just come out of the First World War, there was a lot of pressure on him as a leader coming from internally, but also coming from the West, who would have loved to have taken back Istanbul and turned it into Constantinople. And his decision to turn it into a museum, I think, was such a strategic and important decision to give that building a whole new perspective and allowing people from all faiths to walk in there and just honour that incredible design and architecture.
You gave it to all people.
I think that's it, definitely, Eric.
So, David, as we wrap up, I'm struck by how Hagia Sophia embodies ambition, resilience, reinvention, and legacy, the very qualities that define successful projects today. It reminds us that great work isn't just about technical achievement. It's about purpose, identity, and the courage to build something that lasts and lasts. David, thank you for sharing your insights, your stories, and your reflections. It's been a wonderful conversation. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey through one of history's greatest projects. I'm Eric, and this has been Historical Projects, a community podcast exploring project success and leadership. Until next time.